Welcome to a special edition of Firearms Friday. I'm historian Evan Green, and today I'm a guest at the Wyoming Pioneer Memorial Museum in Douglas, Wyoming. Douglas is about 130 miles north of Cheyenne, and it is on the Oregon Trail. It is adjacent to Fort Fetterman and has a lot of local interesting history. And with me today is Doyle Evans. Doyle is a jack of all trades here at the museum, wears a lot of different hats. I'm amazed at the really good job you guys do with your displays and your interpretation. You're right on it.
Thank you.
I'm really impressed. And you got what, two and a half people?
Yeah, 2 full-timers, a handful of part-timers, seasonals, a small and very dedicated group of volunteers.
Wow, I'm just, again, impressed.
And that's all spread across 3 sites. Because, like you mentioned, we also have Fort Fetterman, which we administer, and also the Camp Douglas World War II Prisoner of War Camp, which is another interesting chapter of Wyoming history.
Yeah, Jenna talked a little bit about that to start with, but it was Italian and German prisoners of war in World War II, and they were very well treated. They worked, they earned salaries in some cases, and were pretty well taken care of. So, okay, we have here another somewhat abused Spencer saddle ring carbine. So, tell me about this one, Doyle.
Okay. Like you said, this is a Spencer. Mm-hmm. It is a model 1865, made under contract by Burnside. Mm-hmm. My research says that this was chambered in 50 caliber, 50-56, I think. Mm-hmm. They did make a couple different chamberings. Most of these were 52-56, I believe, mm-hmm. or 56-56. But
and in that era, there was no real convention for the designation of cartridges. You could call it whatever the hell you wanted to if you made it. Yeah.
But one way, or at any rate, this gun, 7-shot internal magazine here in the butt, and like you said, this is one that has led a very hard life.
Yes.
And there are some theories I have for why that is, that are connected to the story that is connected to it.
Okay.
So, this is one that is that was supposedly used in the Lightning Creek fight, or massacre, or battle, or however you want to frame it. It's been framed many ways. Basically, by the turn of the 20th century, the Indian Wars were not 100% done, but for the most part, they were.
Pretty much over.
Most of the tribes had been confined to reservations. By and large, most of them had tried to adapt from their previous lifestyles to the ones that were being more or less set out for them by the government.
Yeah, they had very little choice. The buffalo were all gone.
But there were someone were still trying to figure out some way to maintain some of their cultural practices. And one of those ways was the Oglala Sioux, which are up at the Pine Ridge Reservation over in South Dakota, could get a pass from the Indian agent there on the reservation to go out and gather plants, berries, roots, things like that. And in 1903, that ended up being the thing that ended up causing one of the last blood-spilling incidents in the Indian Wars. So on October 20th of that year, 1903, now mind you, this is just a few weeks, well, a couple months, but before the Wright brothers took to the air.
Right.
So this was very recent.
In terms of Wyoming history. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Most of the Indian Wars period was before Wyoming got statehood. We'd been around for close to 15 years at that point as a state. But at any rate, there was, on or about October 20th, a group of Oglala led by a gentleman by the name of Charles Smith, set out from the Pine Ridge with a pass from their Indian agent, John Brennan, to gather, like I said earlier, herbs, roots, and berries. Now, apparently it was not unheard of for the parties that got these passes to go out and also do some hunting that was illegal. Poaching. It was something of a friction point between the people and politicians of the states that bordered where these reservations were at, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs authorities and the federal government.
And some of those conflicts are really still happening over fishing rights.
Oh, yeah.
And other things that were guaranteed to the tribes in treaties that they are now prohibited from doing by game laws.
And there was even a Supreme Court case, Ward versus Racehorse in 1896, where I forget the tribe, but in Idaho, were coming into Wyoming and violating Wyoming game laws, and that actually set Supreme Court precedent that state game laws overrode treaty obligations in terms of things like that.
And the Native American guy, Racehorse, was hunting in their traditional grounds, hunting grounds, kind of adjacent to Yellowstone National Park.
Right. But especially at the time, Supreme Court precedent didn't always, information didn't spread super fast, and how much does the average person actually pay attention to Supreme Court rulings?
Right.
At any rate, a lot of these natives still thought, no, I'm going to keep hunting antelope like we've been doing since time immemorial.
Yep.
And that was kind of the attitude that this gentleman, Charles Smith, had. He had supposedly, previous interactions with Weston County Sheriff Bill Miller over illegal hunting. And it was actually Sheriff Bill Miller of Weston County who, on October 20th, 1903, received reports that several bands from Pine Ridge were in Wyoming poaching game, potentially killing domestic cattle, and also allegedly stealing from sheep wagons, whatever ranch buildings. So Sheriff Miller was able to actually get a warrant for two anonymous parties or individuals who were supposedly engaging in this slaughter of game. And it wasn't just, one guy going out and shooting a deer. Some of these, according to reports that I read, some of these incidents were just a line of Indians going 50 miles wide, just going across the prairie, killing everything that moved.
Wow.
How true that is, I don't know. People did spin some pretty good yarns back then, but who am I to say it didn't happen?
Right.
So to try to keep that from happening, or to keep any of these depredations from occurring, Sheriff Miller put together a posse, originally 6 men, and went out to investigate and arrest whatever parties were responsible for these depredations. A couple of days later, they came across a small band near Lance Creek who were arrested, disarmed. A couple of guys broke off from the posse and took the folks they detained back to Newcastle. Most of the time when they did that, it would be a matter of, okay, yeah, you broke the law, pay a fine, okay, go back to the reservation. But not, for one reason or another, Sheriff Miller's posse continued on and continued looking for other offenders, I suppose, and just kept on the prowl. Meanwhile, Charles Smith's party met up with another party from Pine Ridge, led by William Brown, who was also out there, gathering whatever they were permitted to gather, engaging in some hunting, mostly prairie chickens, prairie dogs, things like that to feed you while you're out and about. Well, Sheriff Miller's posse on October 30th came across this combined party led by Smith and Brown. And from there, the story kind of diverges of what happens next.
Two sides to every story.
Yeah. So one story is that was espoused by the members of the posse, that when they met with Smith and Brown's party, Smith and Brown were out doing something away from the camp, and they eventually made their way back. Miller and his party waited for him to get back, and when Smith rode back into camp, he had a still bleeding, dressed antelope carcass on his horse. Smith swore up and down that he had traded for this from someone else and it was all above board. But Miller said, "No, you obviously just poached that. You're under arrest." Now, Smith and Miller, like I said earlier, had previous bad blood. They had a history. Smith said in that previous encounter that the two had that he could hunt what he wanted, when and where he wanted. Nobody could stop him. And if he wanted to kill anyone who wanted to stop him from doing what he wanted, he could.
This is the sheriff's version of that encounter?
Yes. But Miller told the Oglala, "Okay, come with us to Newcastle. You're under arrest." So they made their way over kind of eastward. There was a fork in the road. One way would take you to South Dakota. The other way would take you to Newcastle. Instead of going to Newcastle, the natives went back toward the reservation. Now, Miller said, "Hey, no, you're going the wrong way. Come with me to Newcastle." And again, the sheriff's side here. The natives encircled the posse and adamantly refused to go into custody. Sheriff Miller and his team decided that the best course of action would be, they were surrounded, everyone was armed, it was a tense situation. The best thing they could do would be to disengage, break off, go to one of the nearby ranches, get reinforcements, catch back up. So that's what they did. And the next day, on October 31st, with a few extra guys in tow, including area rancher, hunter, and trapper Louis Falkenberg, who will come in hand, and also John Owens, a quote, noted Indian fighter and gunslinging lawman who had apparently killed no less than a dozen people in the line of duty.
I know him. We have his revolver.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like he's an interesting character to look at on his own accord.
I think the body count is off, but...
like I said about Tall Tales. About yarns getting strong. One way or another, this reinforced posse caught up with the Oglala band near Lightning Creek, 50 miles from where they first ran into each other.
Wow.
Members of this posse had taken defensive positions on either side of the road, waiting for the Indians' wagon train to come by. Then they confronted each other. Miller demanded surrender again, and in answer, one of the natives opened fire, shot first, and a firefight ensued. One of the members of the posse says that he heard the report of a black powder weapon, which this is a black powder weapon.
Yep.
And a bullet was said to have hit Louis Falkenberg, one of the new posse members in the neck, killing him instantly.
Wow.
With a large caliber bullet, which
It's a large caliber
50
bullet
caliber
comes out of
bullet
that Spencer.
is a pretty
Yes,
large
for sure.
gun. A 50 caliber is a pretty large bullet.
Yep.
So it's very possible, again, no way of confirming this, but very possible that this meets a lot of the criteria of what I read about in reports and accounts of the time. Well, after a few people ended up getting shot, the natives, again, still the posse's tail, turned tail, ran, left large amounts of fresh game meat, stolen goods, and a wagon that had been damaged. Just ditched it all as they were making their way to the border, to the state line with South Dakota, just to make their load lighter. So that's the posse's side of things. The Oglala contend that during the first encounter, Smith returned to the camp with no antelope on the horse. Sheriff Miller did confront Smith and told him to go to Newcastle, but did not present a warrant or otherwise tell anyone that they were under arrest. And while Smith did vigorously protest and refuse to go back to Newcastle, saying that he doesn't live in Newcastle, he has no reason to go to Newcastle, members of the party did come closer, not to encircle Sheriff Miller or anyone in his posse, but just to try to see what the commotion was about.
Right.
And when they met that fork in the road, Sheriff Miller let him go. So they thought, okay, cool, we're home free. Let's get back home. This is getting strange. And then the next day, they were passing through a gate when all of a sudden, again, the Oglala story, these posse members converged on either side of them and just started opening fire. No confrontation, no, hey, you're under arrest, nothing like that.
Wow.
Which one of those stories is true? I don't know. It's somewhere in between. The historical record is very split on this one. Most of the accounts that I read when researching this were either on the side of, the sheriff and his party were just trying to do their job. These guys from the reservation were coming off and poaching all kinds of game, and when Sheriff Miller tried to stop them, they murdered them in cold blood. Whereas the Oglala side is they were just off minding their own business, doing their thing.
To be off,
they weren't breaking any laws. Just Sheriff Miller and his posse just decided to keep harassing them, and then it ended up with 7 people dead.
Wow.
But they went to trial. Nobody was convicted of anything. All 9 of the Oglala who were associated with the event were acquitted. No members of the posse were ever charged with any crimes. And it turned into kind of a political spectacle between the government of Wyoming and the government of South Dakota and the feds. And this was during the period of yellow journalism really being a thing. And Wyoming local newspapers were not at all immune from that.
Yeah, of course not.
But at the end of the day, what we can agree with is these interactions did lead to the death of 7 people. Wow. And oddly enough, the story does not end there. In fact, the supposed individual who possibly may have had this gun was an Oglala by the name of Black Kettle. He and the other native dead from that event were buried kind of nearby where they were shot. They're on Lightning Creek, about 100 yards away from where a pretty distinctive tree that was kind of a landmark. In 1935, a party of Oglala came from the Pine Ridge Reservation to the site of the shootout to ask the landowner, hey, can we exhume our dead and bring them back to the reservation? And the landowner said, oh yeah, absolutely, let's do it. And it's kind of interesting. Apparently, some of the members of this party in 1935 had been a part of the band
Oh, really?
in that
In 1903?
in 1903.
Wow.
And they were able to precisely triangulate exactly where everyone was buried.
Wow.
And when they first try hit pay dirt, exhumed everyone, took them
Wow.
back to the reservation.
Wow, amazing.
The one exception, Black Kettle.
Really?
That is because apparently they hadn't buried them deep enough or something. Not sure exactly what happened. But shortly after the battle, a local rancher by the name of Lou Cook had apparently, the past was the worst, taken the buckskin clothes off of Black Kettle as a souvenir to give to his wife.
Here, honey?
Yeah.
Wow.
And those clothes are in our collection today.
Really?
Yes.
Amazing.
And then a year later, he went back to the same site and found Black Kettle's skeletal remains still there, and he decided to collect them up and put them all in a gunny sack. And Black Kettle's remains remained in this gunny sack until the late 20s or something like that, when he brought it into the then new Wyoming Pioneer Association, headed by L.C. Bishop, who we've mentioned in a couple of other videos. And then the Wyoming Pioneer Association, being one of the forerunners to the Wyoming Pioneer Museum, ended up with this bag of Native American skeletal remains just sitting in our collection. Absolutely no way that would fly today. But back in the 1920s, it wasn't. There weren't any laws in place.
Before
against that.
NAGPRA, before there was a move to return remains,
Right.
particularly. And there's still tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of
yeah.
Native American remains in museums and collections across the country. It's crazy.
But regardless of that, L.C. Bishop was not a fan of having a literal bag of skeletal Native American remains just sitting in a corner. So he had a box made up, gave it a burial behind the Pioneer Cabin, which is actually right next to the current Wyoming Pioneer Memorial Museum. Mm-hmm. But he kept the skull out and put it in a display case, which, again, would not fly today, I would imagine.
Oh no, let's hope not.
And then later in the mid-30s, another band of Oglala happened to be in the neighborhood and then came across this skull. And they looked at it and realized, hey, this is Black Kettle. So then they got to talking to L.C. Bishop about it and said, hey, can we get his skeletal remains back to give him the proper honors? And they talked about it a bit and negotiated. And then what they agreed to was that Black Kettle's remains would be reinterred in the spot that they were in, behind the Pioneer Cabin, during the 1938 Wyoming State Fair. But it would be done using it would be done in accordance with all the Oglala customs. It would be officiated over by a medicine man, specifically, I'm sorry, I have it in my notes, Black Elk, who had been present at many of the major Indian Wars battles and traveled with Buffalo Bill to Europe. Mm-hmm. So it was all done in accordance with custom. It was just done behind the Wyoming Pioneer Cabin here on the fairgrounds instead of on the reservation. And Black Kettle's widow was actually still alive at the time. She was something like 90 years old, and then apparently the night before the ceremony, a small group of natives came in to ask, okay, just before we do this, can we examine the remains just to make sure? And L.C. Bishop said, yeah, sure, we can do that. And it said in news reports at the time that his widow saw the skull on display in this display case and proceeded to lament and wail from the time she laid eyes on it until the next day when the ceremony occurred.
Wow.
Which I can't blame her at all.
No.
That would have been, I couldn't imagine. So that was a very odd series of events. Not a glorious chapter in Wyoming history, but one that still, I think, needs to be remembered.
Absolutely,
And,
yeah. It's a great story. I want to, before we leave this, I want to see if Dean can zoom in to show where this piece of the stalk is missing, and that is probably the exterior tube that holds the follower that would have been filled with cartridges. So, and once again, great story. I really appreciate that.
oh yeah, thank you for letting me tell it.
I was somewhat aware of the Lightning Creek incident, but not of all those details. So, all right, my friend. Again, I really appreciate your work here for the Pioneer Museum.
Oh, likewise.
For us to be able to come here and make some videos. So,
Oh, well,
thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you for coming by.
So if you're interested in more information about the Douglas area and some of the history that Doyle has talked about, you'd be welcome to contact him through the Wyoming Pioneer Memorial Museum. They have a webpage with the contact information on it. If you want to talk to me, call the Wyoming State Museum, leave a message, and I'll get back to you. So thanks for watching.